Hey, Grace Church, this is Pastor Levi. I hope you're doing well. Hope you're staying at home and washing your hands and doing all of the appropriate things and are praying for your church family, your city, your state, your country, and the world during this time. I'm here to bring a devotional today from Mark chapter 3, verses 13 through 19. And this is when Jesus has the authority to ordain or call people. It says, Jesus went up the mountain and summoned the people he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, naming them apostles, to be with him and to be sent out as heralds and to have authority to cast out demons. In appointing the 12, he named Simon Peter, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. The others were Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Cananean, and Judas Iscariot, the one who handed him over. When I first read this passage, I thought, well, this is interesting. We have a list of names, but at the end of the day, it's about Jesus' authority to call people to set them apart. And I think that these disciples had no idea what they were getting into when they said yes to Jesus. It was a new way of life for some of them. They were fishermen, they were tax collectors, they were doctors, and they had no idea, I don't think, what was coming. And so over the course of the years that they followed Jesus, one of the things that we see is that they had to have a change of mindset. Their understanding of who God was and how he worked in the world was going to be altered in huge ways. In a sermon a couple weeks ago, I said there's this refrain that we hear from Jesus that you have heard it said, but I say unto you. And so every time he used that phrase, those who were closest to him and those who were hearing what he had to say were relearning something that they already knew. They were being transformed in the process of following Jesus. And I wrote, I don't know if it's a devotional, I don't know what it was, but I wrote a piece yesterday that's going to go out in our church newsletter called E-News. And I realize not everybody reads that. But my wife and I were going to the grocery store and we were talking about things that we don't normally talk about. We were talking about our finances. We were talking about budget where we could cut back. We were talking about what happens if there's a pay cut in the future, like how much could we afford before things really looked different for our situation. And so we were talking through those things. We don't usually, that's not our topic of conversation. We're trying to figure out who's taking my son to soccer or my daughter to dance, and does Heather have band practice this week. We're just trying to coordinate travel, is what a lot of our conversations seem to revolve around. But in the course of our conversation, and I'm going to write about this. You can read the whole thing below, but we had an expense that we could cancel, but Heather, she said, what if we decide to pay this person a percentage of what we would pay them, even if they're not doing the work for us? And I said, yeah, absolutely. But in the days that have gone by, I realized that my wife and I, in our years of following Jesus, and even in the years since we first got together, this October will be 20 years married, and we dated for a season before that. We have been changed because we have followed Jesus. He called us to follow him as he offers to everyone. And early in our marriage, when it came to generosity, when it came to giving, we did what we were supposed to do. We gave a certain amount to the church and we gave to other things. But if we're honest, we really did it out of a sense of obligation. We maybe even did it out of a little bit of fear because God said this is what we're supposed to do, so we have to do it. There wasn't a lot of joy in it, and uh, I heard a sermon a few years ago that talked about the difference between a worldview of scarcity and a worldview of abundance. And I was reading a blog by a pastor, and she puts it so eloquently, and you can read it below. But a theology of scarcity relies upon oneself. Our idea of how we provide for ourselves begins and ends with us. And a theology or a worldview, a mindset of abundance is rooted in God, that it all begins and it ends with Him and His ability to provide for us. And so, in the moment that we were having that conversation, I realized that the conversation would have gone far differently 20 years ago, but because we are committed to following Jesus, He is continuing to transform us from the inside out. I encourage you to read the piece below and be challenged by it. It's okay if it rubs you or it sticks you a little bit the wrong way. That's all right. That's all right. But we're called to understand that we have a God who is abundant in all things, even in a day and in a season in a world that is screaming that everything is scarce.